Hello, everyone. I love being here, not just because I like going to conferences I don't have to organize myself, but also because I got to hear Mohammed's presentation. You know, I like it when people say they're in the business of smiles, because I'm very much in the opposite business. I'm in the opposite business in that my business is tears and blood. And we certainly need more people like Mohammed and his enthusiasm. Thank you very much. What I want to do in the next 10 to 15 minutes is to talk you to three things. I want to talk you through the idea of your Machiavellian moment, and I don't have a nice presentation, I don't have fireworks, and I don't have smiles. But what I have, I think, is a pretty good argument for a European, a Montenegrin moment. I want to quickly explain to you what is different this time in the kind of wake-up calls that we're seeing. I want to take you back to the last Munich Security Conference, which has just taken place. I want to briefly tell you a little about J.D. Vance's seismic speech. I want to tell you what that means for Europe, and then I want to tell you what that means for you, for business people, for investors, for developers, for policymakers and decision makers here in Montenegro. See, a Machiavellian moment, and Mohammed has mentioned Florence. A Machiavellian moment is that moment when a republic or any other political entity realizes its own mortality, realizes the make or break moment. And there have been many of those in the past. The French Revolution, the American Civil War, the end of the Cold War. I could go on for hours and hours. And we keep saying, you know, Europe is receiving a wake-up call, the Brexit, the first invasion in Ukraine, the second invasion, the pandemic, and so on. And so this word wake-up call has seen a bit of an inflationary use. I want to make sure that you understand that we believe this time is different. And I know that people always say this time is different, and most often they are wrong. We believe we are right for a couple of reasons. If you look at the speech that J.D. Vance gave in Munich exactly 50 days ago, and you look at what has changed in Europe since then, you should realize very quickly that this time is different. Let me tell you what we were actually planning to do with Munich and what came out of it. I'm not going to advertise Munich. I'm not going to tell you that it is the most prominent event in the world. We are more prominent in the UN General Assembly. And by the way, that's something I think is terrible. We have more presidents and prime ministers and more ministers coming to Munich to talk about war and peace than going to the General Assembly. That's wrong, and it's a sign of the times. But what we tried this time, 50 days ago, was to send a message of hope, to focus on the silver linings, and to get out of the negative narrative that we thought has caught hold in Europe. Yeah, obviously that did not work. People keep saying that the Western alliance was ended in Munich. People keep saying that the death knell for NATO was rung in Munich, and that we're seeing a breakup of that marriage between the United States of America and the European Union. We had different plans, but then came Donald Trump 2 days before the conference and said he had a great phone call with President Putin. That already freaked out some of our guests. Then, 1 day before the conference, we had Pete Hegseth, now well known through Signal, speak in Brussels about the end of American support to Ukraine and American skepticism about NATO. That freaked out even more people. Then, 2 hours before our conference start, we had an Islamic terrorist attack just outside our security perimeter with 2 people, a young mother and a very young child, killed. That obviously ruined the mood even further. And then came J.D. Vance. And I'm not sure if you've heard his speech. I'm pretty sure you've heard about his speech. But he did something very different from every other American that has ever spoken on our stage. And over the last 60 years, we've had presidents, vice presidents, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, senators galore. If you look at the last 60 years, all of these American speakers have always said the exact same thing with slightly different wordings. And let me generalize. What they have said over the last 60 years was, dear Europeans, we like you. You look like us, but you're not doing enough for your own defense. Go, get started, do more, otherwise we will leave. And then they never left. And we didn't do much more for our own security. And so J.D. Vance wanted to do something different. He did not want to add the 61st Munich Security Conference speech by an American vice president, president, and so on, that would go according that muster. He wanted to try something different. No wake-up calls anymore. He did something that is well known for martial arts. Find a pressure point and press it. What's the difference between a pressure point and a wake-up call? With a wake-up call, you have no control over what the person you're waking up actually does after the wake-up call. They may actually stay awake. They may go back to sleep. They may fall out of bed. They may run away. You have no idea. With a pressure point, some of you probably do martial arts, you know that. When you press a pressure point, you know exactly what the other person does, in which direction he or she twists or falls. And that's what they did. They looked for the most painful pressure point they could find, and it was our values. Because deep down, think about it, sometimes we may believe Americans err on the side of conservatism, and sometimes they may err on the side of wokeism, liberalism, you have it. But basically, they believe in the same values and the same basic rules as we do. By attacking those perceptions of joint rules, he pulled the rug out of people's feet. And you should have seen that room. It was eerily quiet. Not a single person clapping. People were freaked out. And so my usual argument to those that say this wasn't a foreign policy speech, this was an insult, is it was one of the best foreign policy speeches ever held. If you don't judge it by the strange examples, if you don't judge it by the preaching style, his delivery tone, but if you only judge it by whether it achieved its intended effect, there are very few speeches in history that have been that effective. Because look back, what has happened to Europe in the last 50 days? We have seen the Rearm Europe program. We have seen emergency council meetings. We have seen an unheard of constitutional change in my own country, Germany. We have seen last night's coalition treaty that is the most extensive change to German foreign policy since the end of the Second World War. This is massive. And yes, Donald Trump's tariff policy, Donald Trump's mentioning of Greenland, Canada, Panama, ever so often, the Gaza Riviera, that has also helped set the stage. But at the end of the day, it was J.D. Vance's speech on our stage that set that total and pretty universal process in motion. People then always say, well, we Europeans aren't ready, we don't know what to do. We know exactly what to do. There are 5 strategic imperatives that I want to quickly walk you through. The first is to get our house in order. To get our house in order when it comes to military capabilities and economic competitiveness. The second strategic imperative is to get real about our dependencies, to identify our dependencies, to address our dependencies, and ultimately to reduce our dependencies. We in Europe, and particularly we in Germany, have been wholly dependent on Russian energy, on American protection, and on Chinese markets. This does no longer work. We need to become not totally independent, not totally autark, not totally autonomous, but we must reduce our cluster risks across the world. That's the second strategic imperative. The third strategic imperative is easy. We need to de-risk, diversify, decluster, and build up resilience. We need to replace dependence on trade with China with more trade with India, more trade with Nigeria, more trade with South Africa, but also more trade with Togo, Montenegro, Albania, and other countries. This is an all-encompassing challenge. The fourth strategic imperative is very much connected to that. We as Europeans, and all of you are Europeans too, we are losing the global south. It's a terrible term, but the global south are those 100-ish countries south of the equator that are struggling with development, that are growing, but not necessarily fast enough. And getting those countries back involved, making sure that these countries have a stake in global prosperity and globalization is the right thing to do. And it comes to the fifth strategic imperative, namely to reform, redevelop, foster global cooperation. Look how weak global cooperation has become. Look at the sorry state of the United Nations and other global governance mechanisms. It has been our fault as the West, as Europe, that this has become less attractive to the global south. We need to take the concerns of poor countries very serious. They may be insignificant politically here and there, but they're certainly not insignificant when it comes to reforming the UN and the Bretton Woods institutions. If you look at these 5 imperatives and you ask yourself, okay, Benedikt, very interesting. Not as much fun as Mohammed's presentation, but sounds interesting. But why is it relevant to me as a property developer in Montenegro, as a yacht harbor builder in Porto, Montenegro, as an investor? All of these 5 imperatives mean that countries like Montenegro and regions like the Western Balkans are becoming more important to the success of the European core. This is not just a Machiavellian moment, it is certainly also a Montenegrin moment. We need your resources, human, mineral, we need your money, your investment, we need more Mohammeds here in Montenegro in order to ensure that you can join the European Union as quickly as possible and that you can help the rest of us achieve these 5 strategic imperatives. Again, no video with fireworks of me to end this, just a plea. Let us work together to use this Machiavellian moment and turn it into a Montenegrin moment. Thank you so much for your attention. I think the next speaker has arrived.